I'm going to ask Dr. Alexander to respond to the response. What was your response?
I agree. I think she even took it further than me, but I'm trying to just celebrate him. But I think the issues that she raises are the very issues, because we look at King as one layer, civil rights. King was concerned about all of the injustices, and I especially lift up the issue of the war.
Yeah.
He got really what got him in trouble. As long as you're fighting for black folks, we can get over that because we're not going to do much with them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're messing with the military-industrial complex and our means of sustaining this, quote, growth that we need. And so I think it's that you're right on target, that there's so much we could say. If we unpack really all that King stood for, he didn't just get killed because he fought for black folks. He got killed because he stood up against an American dream that was deficient and defective at its core. And he threatened that dream at its core. And people, it's one thing, he was an uppity black man. Let's just put it that way. He had the nerve to stand, to speak face to face, to speak truth to power, and people were listening to him, and he was making the world, he was exposing us to the world in a way that we had not been exposed before. I really appreciate what you have to say, and I second it. I mean, I think we have to look at just how deep, and a lot of us, even as we lived through it, did not realize what was going on. We didn't understand the depth of what was going on. I think only as we stand back on this side and look at it, we really realize all that he stood for and all that he died for.
Thank you so much. Just a question. It was interesting listening to both of your speeches. And one niggling question that I have is, first of all, we have the dream that it seems that King is trying to bring America back to its original goal, to being, a place for dreams and equality. But yet, critical race theorists nowadays are saying that when America is behaving in these bigoted ways, it's not because it's gone off track,
right?
But it's doing what it
actually
is. And to me, that's disturbing, because as a Christian, and also as someone who believes that we can be better and society can be better, it's disturbing to know that, as critical race theorists say, that King was somewhat, under civil rights, naive in that you can't bring them back to anything because... Yes. So how do we reconcile the idea that we have a dream for a better society when at the same time, at the core of what America is, when America is being racist and all the rest of it, it's being normal. It's not gone off track, it's been normal. How do we as Christians kind of reconcile those two things, that society can be better, at the same time, it's just being the way, it's doing what is natural? How do we reconcile that?
It's funny, people always talk about, let's go back to the good old days. And I always ask the question, good for who?
For who?
But I think that part of the problem, and I'm not sure it's naivete, because King comes in a place in history where this is as good as it's been for us, but the fact that this country was started on bloodshed. From the day the white man stepped foot on this soil and started wiping out an entire nation of people as if they weren't human. And we have never repented for that sin. This is me speaking. It's not God, as Paul would say. But I think the very fact that this country was started with bloodshed when we came in and wiped out Native Americans as if they were trash, and no one has ever repented of it. We cannot improve upon something that was never fixed. And so, yes, go back to what? So if we go back to race and we as human beings, it's not just white people, we as human beings, by our nature, our fallen nature, have a need to be better than somebody. But I've never been able to understand how we start this dream that slavery happened and it was so terrible. And no one talks about the hundreds of thousands of people who had been in this country for hundreds of years who were just wiped out as if they had no meaning whatsoever. So I think that truth has to be talked about first before we go on to heal the rest of this.
Dr. Sechrest, what do you think?
So one of the things I really appreciated about Dr. Alexander's lecture was I mean, I really liked the blend that she had of a reckoning about how far we have come. I think I am always reluctant to concede to folks that things are as bad as they've ever been. That's just not true. That's just not true. She talked about her mom, yes. Right? What my mom experienced, what my grandmother experienced in this country. I have not lived through that, and my kids are not living through that. So I think it's important, as Dr. Alexander did, to identify where we have made progress. But what has been capturing my attention lately has been this taking a step back and to say, oh, wow, this is a recurring pattern. I don't think as kids, I was, frankly, okay, I've been reading this book, White Rage, right? It's a 2016 book, and it's making the same case about that there's always a backlash to moments of it. And what we're witnessing now is a backlash to the concrete election of an African-American man. And I was actually surprised to read that Ken had written the same thing in 1967. So for me, my recent awakening, right? I study these issues all the time, but right, like in recent days, I've been taking this step back. I'm like, oh wow. I don't think I agree with Dr. King that for every one step forward, there's a step back. I think it's more like 2 to 1. Right? So I think we're net ahead. But it is remarkable, even though we have many things that are places where we are moving ahead, that we are still fighting voting rights and detention centers. Do you guys know that? That these camps were undocumented people are being put into, but prior to deportation, these are concentration camps. There is like no other word for it. It's amazing that in 2018, we're having to have conversations about that. And that American citizens do not have the right to have their spouses and children and family, parents with them. Like that boggles the mind. That just boggles the mind. So I do think it's a 2 to 1 thing. I think that it's important that we bless God for all of the steps forward, and that we cling to God for all of the steps back.
Thank you so much. Okay, I want to ask the audience to come with a question or two.
Why is it, do you think, easier to think about a multi-ethnic cabinet in the government than it is to think about a church that looks like what you described?
Well, actually, I go to a church that looks like what I described. So, but the church, it's like Martin Luther, at the same time, saint and sinner. And we are Christians. We love Jesus, but we are fallen human beings with the same pecs that people who are not Christian. We like to tell ourselves that because we're Christian, our heart is pure, but it's not. And there are many elements that go into what a church looks like, and it's not even if you talk. And when you say church, do you mean the Sunday morning worship, or do you mean the hierarchy of the church?
Oh, Sunday morning worship. It's a challenge to find places where it really truly looks like what you just described.
because we all have we're selfish. And even black people, we have to admit, see, I don't want to put all the onus on white people. We want our worship our way too. Everybody, I make this the challenge for me, and I'll say this. I can't worship God outside of who I am. So as a black person, there's certain things in worship that I want to be a part of my worship. But if I can learn to share that at a table where I can do that, but you can also do you, what we either do is an either or rather than a both and. And so I want it my way, you want it your way. And I'll give an example of myself. I serve on several multicultural staffs. I'm always in a multicultural context, and I get called names by people. Because I have a friend who's a black pastor, and I shared the fact that my pastor was white. I go to a multicultural church, and this is a bishop of a major church, and he walked up to me. I did a presentation. He said, I'm appalled that you would say that. He said, I'm offended that you have a white pastor. And he said, and I will say this, and he means well, he said, I don't like white people. And my question to him is, and how many white people do you know? And I serve in a church where my pastor loves everybody. But that's hard. But so it takes intentionality, but it takes a willingness to compromise. So I was serving at another church. My pastor was black. The church was multicultural. And it wasn't even race. It was culture. We had a Jamaican family, and Clifton's Jamaican, so you'll get this. And so we were going to have Christmas dinner, and they were going to have the spread. And so the Jamaican family wanted to bring fish with eyes. And I said to my pastor, we can't do that. That's disgusting. And he said to me, if we're going to be multicultural, we're going to be multicultural. They need to bring what it's their thing, and we have to make place for that. But that takes intentionality. And the reason why it doesn't work, it's hard work. We want an easy, cheap answer. Just say Jesus 3 times and it goes away. But what it requires is of us to sit down and have these kind of conversations. And these conversations hurt. For me to say to you that it hurts me when you look down on me and treat me like I served on another white staff, had a conversation with my pastor, and I was complaining about Regent, and he said, you shouldn't be talking about how you be treated. So we went on this. He said, I think God is trying to teach you something. So I said, what? He said, well, he's trying to teach you patience. And I said, that's what they told the slaves.
Hello.
This is a white pastor. My white pastor looked me dead in the face and said, I don't think slavery was that bad. And I looked at him and I said, for who? Because for us, it was a problem. Now, y'all might not, And he said, I was invited to this church because this white church wanted to integrate and wanted me to come and be part of their pastoral staff. And he said to me, I believe slavery taught black people a special grace. And I said, to do what? And this is the truth. He said, y'all are the best singers and athletes in the world. And I said, let's be clear. Before we got here, we could sing. He was sincere. That conversation was painful. But those are the kind of conversations we're going to have to endure. We get to that painful place, and then we back off. And that's why we can't get to the other side of that. And we did get to the other side of that. I quit. But that was, But those conversations have to go on, and we have to unpack them and hear each other and then go past there to get to the other side.
Thank you so much. And it's a good question because I know that I belong to a classical Pentecostal denomination, and I tell you, every time we come to elections...
Don't go there.
It's...
We're in the same denomination.
It's easier to imagine a black president
than a black denominational
leader in the church as a bishop, and that's disturbing. The secular world, what's going on there, particularly within the evangelical.
Particularly within the evangelical.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
What's wrong? What's going wrong?
There's a sociological study by Shelton, and I believe it's Emerson, Shelton and Emerson, the same Emerson that co-wrote Divided by Faith. Mm-hmm. He partnered with a black sociologist, Jason Shelton, And I believe the title is Blacks and Whites in Christian USA, or Blacks and Whites in Christian America, something like that. And what he does is he explores the racial attitudes of white Christians and Black Protestants, white evangelicals and Black Protestants, and looks at other, like, sort of white liberals as well, and finds some characteristic kind of differences. I'm not going to go into detail, but things like Black folk pray more. Like, we need Jesus more. Black folks pray more. White folks prioritize sort of theology over ethics. With Black folks, it's the opposite, right? So things like that, he discerns differences. But on racial animus, on questions that measure racial hostility, the white evangelical church is the worst part of all American society. And right, if you were to read the book Divided by Faith, they try to unpack some of the reasons why they think that is the case. Some of them are sort of cultural, others theological. Some of it's theological, some of it's theological. But I think the key thing that I want to say is that the church has racism. The American church has racism in its DNA. It's not.
Right.
This is.
And you have to understand, in order for them to keep us as slaves, they had to first dehumanize us.
Right.
And so,
Right.
and they set up biblical reasons why
That's right.
we could remain slaves. We were not human. And so we had no souls. We couldn't be saved. And so that's part of the psyche of American Christianity. It doesn't go away after a generation. It's in there. So if you had to tell yourself that this person that stands before you, that you're beating and lynching and denying any rights, I can do this because they're not created in God's image. It's theological. And so I embed that into my psyche, and I take it generation to generation to generation to generation. It doesn't just go away because I wish it and pray it away.
We've got a question.
Yes. Okay, so the phrase white evangelicals or the white evangelical church has become a household phrase since the 2016 elections. What about the white Catholic Church or Anabaptist traditions or evangelical churches?
Church.
And then, and many people actually don't consider Pentecostal under evangelical. So are there things that these other traditions have gotten right that the white evangelicals hasn't gotten right, or are they more alike? Does their whiteness trump their theological traditions?
Could I start on that? I think that's a really really helpful framing of the question. Thank you so much for asking it. And I think that it gets at something that I think all three of these persons on the stage share deep convictions about, that we are better together. That God has preserved in each of these streams something important that the rest of the church needs to benefit from. Right? So for instance, the slavery thing has preserved in the African American church a holism about body, soul, and spirit all together. There's no such thing as a disembodied faith for us. And that, I think, is a gift to other churches. I think that the little bit that I have been able to get in contact through relationships, the Latino church, right? There's nothing like their commitment to family. Whoo, boy, howdy. Right, I can resonate.
And they see the community is family to them.
It is. There is a deep and powerful. Right, the same thing with the Native American church. Right, the connection with land. Right, that we are part of creation. Willie Jennings, right, kind of tried to talk about this and he was, influenced and formed by some Native American theology. So I do believe we are better together. And I think, to the earlier question, a lot of what keeps us apart, right, is this sort of the present flowering of racism. I think that sometimes there's power nobody wants to give up. Dr. Alexander is absolutely right. That happens on all sides of the color line. Like, that each want to preserve, right, their autonomy, especially especially, and I hear this from people, a lot of people of color, not just African Americans, but there's this idea that, you know what, I deal with white folk in
All
charge
day long.
24/7. On Sunday, I want to go to the hospital, get my soul repaired so that I can go out again. So that part of it is that there are institutional kind of reasons that keep us separated. But I absolutely agree that theologically, from the perspective of the author of Ephesians, if we were able to get our house in order, we would be a powerful witness to the world when the rest of the world is struggling with this demographic change and the rising nativism all over the European continent now, right? Like if the rest of the world could see us, which is a global movement, get our house in order, we would be a compelling witness. So I am always wanting to look towards that, but with a clear-eyed kind of vision of what the problems on the ground are and being able to talk through some of those.
But I think it's important too to understand that I do consider myself evangelical, because if you understand what evangelical means theologically, it's those people who hold the scripture in high authority, who believe in the virgin birth, who believe in the atoning work of Christ. That's the broad definition. It has been co-opted in America to be a special group.
Political thing, yeah. Right.
And the problem is that those who call themselves evangelicals, in many instances, the faith that they purport to have is not if we could all agree on that, that's one thing. But they see the American value system as part of their faith commitment. And so white middle class standards of what is proper become a test for what is evangelical. A lot of black folks refuse to call themselves evangelical. I don't. And I have friends in every I have friends in every arena. But we have to debunk what we mean when we use the term, and it gets used very loosely. But many of those people who embed the American and Christian vision into one call themselves evangelical and rail against other people who don't label them and see the American. Let me give you a good example. I was listening to somebody who talked about why the an evangelical church who identified itself, who labeled the healthcare bill, Obama's bill, as sinful. Now, if you're a black person or liberal or whatever, you're saying they can't be Christian. They make perfect sense. Because their premise this is a theological premise, that God's best for people is that they be self-sufficient and self-sustaining. The Bible decries slothfulness and laziness. And if we give people something that they actually should work for, we encourage them to be slothful. Now, taken to us, we know that's not true. But these aren't people that are just mean. They actually believe that they're doing what's biblical. And I can give them credit for that. I disagree with them, but I think a lot of times we think people are evil when what they really are ignorant. And I use the word ignorant to mean this. We think ignorant means I don't know or I can't know. But I want to give you a new definition of ignorant. Look at the word ignorant. You ignore the very information that's in front of you in view of something that's easier for you to take and own. And so people ignore truth because they've been fed this. This is what they've been taught their entire lives. They're hardworking people. They're being biblical. They see people who don't work hard as being unbiblical, regardless of the reason. And so I have to have the grace to say, I understand why you see me that way, but you're wrong. But that, again, is a conversation. It's hard to have that conversation.
But going back to the question, are there any signs of hope? We often look at white evangelicalism, and it's very discouraging in many respects. But in other traditions, we talked about Pentecostalism. And years ago, it said that the color line was washed away in the blood, whether that's true or not. But are there any signs of hope where whiteness doesn't manifest itself in the same way evangelicalism operate? Is it in any other traditions, or is it generic that wherever whiteness is, in every tradition, it manifests itself in the same way that evangelicals operate, if that makes sense? So what I'm saying then,
it makes sense. That's not the.
So when we're looking at all of these traditions, is there any tradition that we can say, in this particular tradition, they're getting it right in terms of how culture and race within that particular church tradition is being worked out? Is there anywhere any signs of hope that we can draw upon as good examples, good starting points?
Can I throw that question back at you? And ask you, where do you see signs of hope?
I see signs of hope, not necessarily in America, but in other, my experience in terms of, I don't see much really, but in terms of the way cultures, not necessarily whiteness, but in terms of my experience in places like Africa or the Caribbean, but in terms of how cultures can work together. But when it comes to how whiteness manifests itself, looking across the traditions, I don't see, personally, and I think that's a legitimate question, I don't see anywhere, whether it's the Catholic Church, Protestant tradition, Pentecostalism, you name it, Anabaptist, where I can say, they're getting it right. We can say to evangelicals, look at what they're doing. No, so I don't know. So it's...
Okay, but I would say for myself, I think the signs of hope are in individual relationships that we build. And I really mean that. I was at Seattle Pacific last month, and I have a colleague who is my mentor, who's a white male, who is launching a campaign against racism and within the Wesleyan tradition, and has taken it upon himself to build a coalition who addresses this issue. But that his taking it upon himself comes out of relationship with people. And I think part of the problem is we've globalized. It's going to start one person at a time, one relationship at a time. And it's not, when I said this morning, if you have a dream, you have to have patience. It's not going to stop tomorrow. But I think what happens is we don't see enough movement. And so and like you said, it's not that there's no movement. It's that it's not as bad as we might think, but it's not fast enough. One of my colleagues, we had a conversation on race, and he was a white man. He said, these things take time.
They take time. God is not in a rush.
However, I said, well, I'm 60-some years old. So when, but we do have to be patient. And I don't mean patient is not complacent. But every time we see movement, we need to rejoice in it. Every relationship that we can build. And the truth is, as Black people, how many white people do we actually build relationship with? And across the board, whatever your race is, how many people do you know that are not like you, that you actually built a relationship with? First of all, none of us trust each other. Let's be honest. We always have at the in the back of our mind somewhere, even though you're really good to me and you're my white friend, I know when the rubber hits the road, how do we break that? And how do we build relationship so that we can, but it is one relationship at a time. And it really is.
Any other questions?
Yes. So the question I want to ask is that, is it possible for us as African Americans, to see it as even a calling? I love the way you talk about relationship. To see it as a calling, to create this awareness of bridging the gap, creating this understanding between Africans and the white evangelical. Can this be a calling? I'm just trying to find out from you. Can we do that? Can we achieve that?
This morning I talked about a dream. So, that that might see, at Azusa Street, that was Seymour's vision. Seymour went to Azusa Street believing God was going to use the Azusa Street revival to bring unity. I will tell you this, he died brokenhearted because it didn't happen. However, that doesn't mean that it can't happen. So if you have a dream, if that's what God is speaking to you, and people will tell you that ain't, people will say it's never going to be unity. I know people that say that right now. We're never going to get along. But if God gave you a vision and said, you're the one I want to use, then you're going to have to be willing to give up your life. And I don't mean that you're going to get shot dead. But everything that's important to you you got to be willing to say, here it is at your disposal, God. Because people are going to tell you you're a fool. First of all, they're going to tell you because you're African, and African Americans are just as racist as anybody else. We look down on Africans, let's be honest. So we don't call them what Trump calls them. I'm in private conversations all the time. We've got to get our own house in order. We've got to start respecting everybody, not just, let's be honest about where we are. But if that's what you think God said to you, if you really in your spirit believe that, then start acting on it. It's a dream. It's not, I don't think there's anything that God wants that he hasn't appointed somebody to bring about. You might be that person for that part of the vision.
Okay.
I have a similar kind of call on my life. I've been called to give my life towards the racial unity of the church. And sometimes I am deeply discouraged. 2016 and 2017, deeply discouraged. But I think what's important, I totally agree with Dr. Alexander. The way that I have ordered my life is to realize that no matter what, the church will be one. It will happen. I may not be here to see it, but my life will count towards it.
Yes.
And it will happen because God has said it so. It will happen. So these are the kinds of, that's the thing I keep in the center of my vision. I teach the Bible, right? And I often say in the introductory class, it took 1,500 years to write the Old Testament, a couple hundred to write the New. God is not in a rush, right?
And then they get it to us in a language we can understand.
God is not in a rush.
Yeah.
This thing is going to take time. Now, I don't believe that means that we should be lazy about it, complacent.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. It means it's going to take some of us to give our lives toward this thing, but it will happen, even though we may see setbacks in front of our faces.
Okay, another question?
My question is a question that still reverberates. So Dr. King said, where do we go from here? What concrete steps are we going to take, number one, to unify ourselves denominationally? I consider myself a Baptist, Pentecostal, Evangelical, Catholic. That just means unity. Catholic means universal, So what must we now do if we are going to be the prophetic voice of this new century? To be a catalyst.
Yeah, I think
that. Okay, all right. Well, some of the concrete things that we can do.
I believe this with my whole heart. I think each of us can, in our private conversations, call out stuff. And because I am, like I said, when people say to me, I've been told that I don't know who I am because I have white friends and black friends. And, I've been denied money for the college by somebody who said they weren't going to give me any money. I had too many white friends. I didn't know that I was black. And I am very black. Been black all my life. Grew up in the hood. Live in a black neighborhood actually. But every time, and I mean this, every time we're with somebody and something is said that is out of line with the body of Christ and Christ's vision for the church, we need to call it down. Because we sit in our private, it starts in the private conversations. When your friends are saying, I have a girlfriend who's a minister of the gospel, she won't use the word white people. She'll say, those people. That dehumanizes a whole race. But if we're not the ones that say they have a name, and there are, my major response is there are no theys. Every single person is a human being. But we have to be the ones as ministers of the gospel to keep teaching our people the truth, to call down stuff that we see, to be prophetic. We're not called to the White House. We're not going to ever talk to Trump. But who can I talk to that's sitting next to me in the pew who says something racist, who says something sexist, who says something homophobic, who says something against people with disabilities, but I let it go or laugh at it? It's only going to change when each of us says, I don't want to hear that stuff. It's not godly. And I think once we start to have those, and then when we invite people, I say this all the time, if I invite you to dinner, but I set the table in a way that there's no room for you, if I serve chitlins, but I invite a whole house full of white people, nobody's going to eat. But if I know you're coming to dinner and I don't fix anything you like, that means I didn't want you there in the first place. When we set the table, we have to make it comfortable to invite people in who are not like us and hold these conversations. This room is mixed. So each of us who leaves here, if we've gained something that we can say to somebody, that's a beginning.
Okay. What other example? Any other examples?
So I am committed to building multiracial coalitions for justice. That is where I spend my energy. So it's very, very similar to what Dr. Alexander has just said. I want each of us to turn around and walk the other way on the racism moving sidewalk. I want each of us to educate ourselves about how other communities of color are racialized, so that we can, when we're in those conversations inside our single mono-ethnic churches or inside our families around Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, and we can interrupt the racist comments we hear made about Mexicans or Africans or whatever, right? Because there are prejudices. I would disagree a little bit on technical terminology here. There are prejudice is human, sinful wherever it shows up, and I would encourage us to learn, to read what people in other communities of color are writing about their experiences about racism, to befriend them, to have relationships. I do believe that we have an amazing opportunity before us as this demographic change takes root. People of color are more committed to Christ, generally speaking, than the wider American public. And so coalitions among people of color and whites of goodwill is a way this world can change when the churches begin to look like that. So those concrete steps, having relationships with someone who don't look like you, reading the things that are written about their communities, getting advice from them about what to read, right? As they can tell about what they know best about where their experience is narrated best. Equipping ourselves to be anti-racist inside our own that's what being an ally is about. Yes. It's about talking to your own community on behalf of others as a result of the education you've gotten, you've given yourself on their issues and friendships that you have formed.
Do you think church planting could be a part of that? Planting?
I think I do. I think that for me, the key has to be, and again, I find myself in violent agreement with Dr. Alexander. It really starts with multi-ethnic leadership teams.
Yes.
Because churches will grow in the ways that their leaders look. So it's really, 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 really difficult to integrate your church when your leadership team doesn't look like how you want your church to look. So that's a real concrete step you can take on that one. It has to do with doing that and setting the table for hospitality, for changing the way you do church based on wanting to attract and welcome and be hospitable to the kind of folks you want to invite in. It is hard work. It is gospel work. I honestly believe that the model for the church, the metaphor of the church, is not a hospital. It is not a hospital. That's not what we're supposed to go to church for. Not to relax, to be equipped, to go out.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And I also think that it's important that I want to make sure that people understand we don't need to enforce multiculturalism
That's true.
in communities
That's
that
true.
are not. If you live in a black community, you don't have to import white people
That's
to make yourself be legitimate.
That's true.
There are reasons for black churches and white churches that have to do with demographics and geography. But even where they're black churches, they can be in fellowship with people who are not like them.
Exactly right.
We can have we don't. It's not it doesn't make any sense. And I live in PG County. It's 90% black. You're not going to have real. We have African and Caribbean, but most of the county is black. And so that makes no sense to say we want 50% of our churches to be, half white. That makes no sense. And it's artificial. But how can I then reach out to other communities across those boundaries and do things so that we get to know each other, so that our children can get to know each other, so that we can go back to our homes though and still respect those people we've been with, even if only for a short time. But we don't have to change who we are. We just have to change how we think about people and how we welcome into our space.
I just want to say a word in agreement there. I do believe that there is a role for homogeneous churches. That there,
Yes.
I believe that our society, U.S. society, is deeply inhospitable for newcomers, and especially when there are language barriers, when there are immigrants coming in, and especially in as much as racism is taking a new and virulent turn, or a reinvigorated virulent term. And so I do think that there's a role for these churches to be, but I guess what I want to do is I always want to have God's vision for the church in front of us. And always be thinking about what little step, what is the next faithful step we can take towards actualizing that vision, like whatever that looks like. We have to be persistent in it. Never give up.
Any other questions?
What are the practices that help you actually be able to not die as you're trying to be hospitable? Or the practices that help sustain you in those hard conversations as you're crossing the lines, as you're trying to define what it means to be Black or brown or anything? I'm just curious to hear what are the practices that have helped you to live out this prophetic imagination as going forward and not giving up.
To not giving up. Well, first of all, I think, and for me, it became really important for me to understand who I was in God. Because after people tell you, and I have been privileged to be in places, especially in terms of education, where I've been in, and I've often been the only Black person. And I can't tell you how tiring that gets. Because often you're always proving yourself to somebody. You got to prove you're smart. You got to prove you're not hostile. You got to prove this. You got to prove that. And so I had to get to a place with God when I started not to look to other people, but to God for my affirmation. And really understand that it didn't matter what I did, I wasn't going to please everybody. And most people weren't going to be pleased. And it became very evident to me that no matter what I did, somebody was going to find something wrong with it. And so instead of keep on beating myself up, and I really got to a place where, you have to look for something good in yourself at some point. And then the Lord spoke to me. I was saying to the Lord one day, and really, the other thing is, prayer is a good thing. I love prayer. And when I say this may not make sense, but conversations with God to me are more important than prayer in terms of just saying to God what I really think. And I remember saying to the Lord one day, I said, I don't care what I do, it ain't the right thing. I said, I don't care what I do, I'm not affirmed. I was just rattling off. And the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm your affirmation. stop looking other places. And that helped me move from a place where I was just feeling beat up and had fought for something I thought was really important and didn't seem to be making any headway. Because there are going to be times, if you really take this seriously, and you're going to be out there by yourself, because when you're fighting, I mean, I have Black folks, friends who, when I take it for white folks, you get labeled certain things. And then when you're taking up for white folks and they stab you in the back, then your Black folks look at you like you was a fool anyway. And so you have to get to a place where I'm doing this because this is what God said do. And it may not seem to be working. With William Seymour College, I have said from day one, we are going to be multicultural. And I've caught flack, but I've also caught flack from white folks that said, why you named the college William Seymour? No white people are going to come to your college. So you can't win. But when you get to the place that you understand this is what God said, and my affirmation comes from God, then, and I will give you a little secret, just a little secret. Once in a while, my father died when I was 8. So I was fatherless. And so I've gotten into this practice of, and this may sound kind of spooky, going into a place where I just crawl up in God's arms and let him love me for a little while. When I get really tired and there's nothing else around me to help me, I just kind of crawl up in God's arms and just let him love me. And then I feel whole again and I can keep going. And I don't know if if that doesn't sound practical, I'm sorry. But for me, it's what keeps me going. And that's the thing, when I think I'm going to lose my mind, I watch my grandson I raised, but I watch him as a father hold his baby in his arms and love her and hug her. I didn't have that. But I realized that is what God does for me. And I watch him just, so she's cherished. And I let God cherish me for a while, and then I can go out there and people think, oh, she's tough, she's hard, she's this, she's that. No, I'm a little girl inside. And I can be honest enough with God to say that. And so I can come back and cry and be a baby and do all those things. And I can let God, dry my tears and wipe me off and then say, go back out there and do what you got to do, child. And that's what I have to do.
Once again, I find myself just simply echoing what Dr. Alexander has already stated. For me, prayer and Sabbath, right? Those are the things that give me fresh manna every day, sometimes hourly, to get through a day.
Yes.
I totally resonate with the fatigue.
Yes.
Totally resonate with the fatigue. I found myself broken a couple years back. I just couldn't integrate another church on my back. And join the AME church. I don't know for how long, but I needed a sabbatical season that way. So I had to learn about prayer. I'm not a Pentecostal, so I learned about prayer by reading books about prayer, and became. It was helpful, right? Just to learn the many different ways there are of praying, and some of these ways I hadn't been exposed to in my tradition. I found very helpful in just getting through another minute, another day, another hour. The Richard Foster's book on prayer is the one I find myself constantly reading and rereading it. These are the things that I happen to love Henry now. I'm confessing deep and dark secrets. I have found Catholic mystical experience deeply enriching for my soul. I'm rereading Teresa Avila's Interior Castles again, right? I'm right in Castle 6. There's only 7, and and Castle 6 is like half the book. And it describes what others have called a dark night of the soul. I mean, boy, it's like naming my life right now. But reading about a 16th century Catholic woman who was naming the same stuff I'm feeling today as an African American woman in the 21st century, it's like a companionship. It just reaffirms my faith in the church that this project is real. So Sabbath and prayer, and for God's sake, you cannot do it alone. You cannot do it alone. So friendships that are long, where you can be your natural self, where they will love you no matter what, when no one else will tell you that, whether that's your significant other, your partner, or whether it's a best friend. One of my best friend today is a woman that I met in seminary. And it started with crying with each other on the couch, like in the women's bathroom, because we couldn't stand it. We went to a school that didn't affirm women's gifts, right? So that was just a struggle to be there as a woman in the MDiv. That was a thing, and that forged a connection that has lasted for over 20 years now. So you can't do it alone. That's not revolutionary. I know it's not, but sometimes it helps to hear someone just say that the things you're probably already doing are the things that that can sustain, and that can carry you through even some of the most difficult times. So I'll be praying for you.
All right, that's all we have time for today. So I want you to put your hands together for Dr. Alexander and Dr. Love Sechrest.
Thank you so
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.